Okay, so picture this. Between 1870 and 1936, you've got this huge wave of Spanish immigrants sending an absolute fortune home from the Americas. We're talking a golden lifeline for so many families. But here's the big question, the real puzzle. Did all that cash actually make Spain, the state, any stronger? Or did it just slip through the cracks? Well, let's dive into this because it's a really fascinating story.
And look, to get a sense of the sheer power we're talking about, you don't even have to look that far back. Just look at today. Remittances, that's the money people send home, are a massive, massive economic force all over the globe. I mean, they often dwarf official government aid, especially during a crisis. They are a true lifeline. And a century ago for Spain, it was exactly the same deal. And who was fueling this lifeline? People. A lot of people. We're talking an estimated 3.5 million Spaniards who packed up and moved to the Americas during this time. I mean, that's just a staggering number. And every single one of them had a story, and so many had families back home who were literally depending on the money they sent. This wasn't just abstract economics. This was about people. So that brings us right back to the central question we're digging into here. With all that money pouring into the country, you'd expect a huge boom for the government, right? A stronger state. Better schools, better roads, the whole deal? Well, let's just say the answer is way more complicated and honestly, a lot more interesting than a simple yes or no. All right, so to figure out where all that money went, we first have to get a handle on what Spain itself was like at the time. And the best way to think about it is like this. Imagine Spain's economy is a big bucket, and you've got this fire hose of money pouring in. Sounds great, right? But what if that bucket is, well, what if it's full of holes? How much of that water is it actually going to hold? So who were these 3.5 million people? I mean, let's put a face to that number. They weren't just a bunch of random adventurers looking for a thrill. No, they were typically young guys from the poorer, rural parts of the country, places like Galicia. A lot of them were trying to escape dead-end farm jobs, sure, but also trying to get out of mandatory military service. And their goal wasn't just to make a quick buck and come home. This was a long-term plan. Move to the Americas, build a life, and, crucially, support the family they had to leave behind.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting. When you look at how the government handled all this, you see this huge contrast. On one side, you've got Spain, which was super passive. Their attitude was basically, people leave, it happens. But then you look at Italy at the same time. Totally different story. The Italian government was actively helping its people leave. They were promoting education to help them meet the requirements to get into places like the US. Spain, mostly, they just cared about making sure these guys didn't dodge the draft. Talk about a night and day difference.
And this right here really drives that point home. What you're seeing is that the number of people leaving Spain had less to do with any Spanish laws and way more to do with the immigration rules in places like Argentina. So when Argentina opened its doors, more people went. When they tightened things up, fewer people went. It shows you pretty clearly that the Spanish state wasn't the one steering the ship here. Not at all.
So let's get back to that leaky bucket idea. Here's a perfect picture of what we mean. Spain's tax system was just not up to the job. Think of two giant leaks. First, you had taxes on things people buy, consumption taxes. But with so much of the economy being informal, cash-in-hand stuff, those were super easy to avoid. Then, the second leak, taxes on actual wealth, like land and property. The government's administration was just too weak to collect it effectively. This was a system that was completely unprepared for this giant wave of new money coming in.
Okay, so we've got the people and we've got the leaky system. Now let's follow the money trail itself, because, and this is super important, not all this cash was the same. It came in different ways, in different amounts, and it was used for totally different things. And understanding that difference is absolutely key to figuring out what happened next.
So you can basically break it down into two main types of money flows. First, you have what we call remittances. Think of these as small, regular payments, just enough to help the family back home buy groceries, pay the bills, to get by. But then you have the second type, capital transfers. And these were huge. These were the entire fortunes of the guys who really struck it rich and came back home ready to make some serious investments.
And this second group gave rise to this incredible figure in Spanish culture, the Indiano. This was the guy who went off to the Americas, the Indies, with nothing and came back a millionaire. And these guys didn't just buy a nicer house. We're talking they built palaces, started brand new industries, funded schools and hospitals. They became huge, influential players in their hometowns.
Okay, now I know these charts might look a little intense, but they show those two paths really clearly. Just look at the one on the left. It shows a super strong connection between that incoming money and private consumption. People buying everyday stuff. But then, look to the right. You see the exact same strong link with big long-term investments, things like new buildings, factories, businesses. So the money was absolutely doing both things at once. It was putting food on the table, and it was building fortunes. All right, so let's pull it all together. You've got a government that's pretty hands-off, you've got a tax system that's a leaky bucket, and you've got these two different streams of money pouring in, one for groceries, one for building empires. So what was the final result for Spain's public finances? Well, this is where the story takes a really, really surprising turn.
Now, at first glance, this looks pretty straightforward, right? You see the lines for remittances and taxes all heading up together. You'd think, great, more money for the state. It looks like a clear win. But it's not that simple. See, a chart like this can be deceiving. It doesn't tell you which taxes were affected or what the government did with the extra cash. And when you dig into that, well, the real impact is not what you'd expect at all.
Okay, so let's break this down, because this table really gets to the heart of it. First, the good news for the state. Over the long term, yes, direct taxes on wealth did go up. That makes sense, right? That's the Indiano effect. All their new businesses and properties eventually got taxed. But now look at the taxes on consumption, on everyday stuff. The effect was negative. How is that possible? Well, it suggests people were spending that money under the table, in the informal economy, where it couldn't be taxed. But here's the real shocker. Look at government spending. In the short term, wherever this private money from abroad flowed in, government spending actually went down.
Yeah, you heard that right. This is what economists call the crowding out effect, and it's a huge deal. What it means is that this golden lifeline from abroad, it basically let the Spanish government off the hook. Instead of this new money adding to what the state was doing, it replaced it. So if a wealthy Indiano came back and built a new school in his village, the government would just go, great, now we don't have to. They simply pulled their own money out.
So I know what you might be thinking. Okay, that's a wild story from 100 years ago, but what does it have to do with today? Well, the thing is, this dynamic between people moving, the money they send home, and the role of the state, it's more relevant right now than it has ever been. And really, the big takeaway is this. You can pour a river of gold into a country, but if that country's government is a leaky bucket, that money is not going to automatically make the state stronger. At the end of the day, it's the structure and the confidence of the government back home that decides everything. It's what determines whether a diaspora's fortune helps build a nation, or whether it just becomes a private substitute for one.
And that leaves us with a really tough question, not just for history, but for right now, in a world where billions and billions of dollars in remittances are flying across the globe. When a nation's own people, living abroad, start providing for their communities, building the schools, supporting the families, creating the jobs, then what exactly is the government's role back home? It's a question that really makes you think about the fundamental deal between a government and its citizens, no matter where in the world they happen to live.